recording. Okay. Great. Okay. So, really excited to have Debbie Reid here tonight with us to present. The name of the talk is Water Sponge Carbon Sink, Creating a Resilient City. And this is about how important soil is in helping to mitigate climate change, which is something I'm very excited to learn about. I don't know much about it. I want to give you Debbie's bio. She has a BS in soil and crop management and an MS in horticulture from Texas A&M University. She has focused in these fields for over 40 years with a natural resource management focus for the last 20 years. In the 1990s, working as the City of San Antonio Parks and Rec Nature Preserve Coordinator, she assisted in the creation of the Master Naturalist Volunteer Program. Subsequently, she was the first city arborist to implement the tree preservation and landscape ordinances. She later joined the Peace Corps, serving in Mexico and Guatemala, again with the natural resource management focus. Currently, Debbie is the technical director for the Greater Edwards Aquifer Alliance, where her focus is on policies, projects, and programs to improve management of stormwater through the use of nature-based solutions. So we are super excited. Debbie, I'm gonna go ahead and mute myself and turn it over to you. Again, for anyone who's just joining, please do go ahead and mute yourselves and turn off your camera so that the focus is just on Debbie and her presentation. And we'll have a Q&A through the chat at the very end. Thanks everyone for being here. All right, Debbie, you can go ahead whenever you're ready.
Well, I just so appreciate having the opportunity to be with one of my favorite groups in the whole world, the Alamo Area Texas Master Naturalist Group. And I'm so excited about sharing some of this information. And I hope I don't drive you crazy because I've become kind of a nerd on this topic. And if you want any more information about later, I could talk your ear off about it. But the water sponge carbon sink, you know, as we start addressing issues in the city, and it's kind of funny around the United States, especially, you've got somebody working on water and somebody working on carbon and another person working on water quality or whatever. So this is a program that hopefully will kind of put it together. And as we start building incentive programs, maybe actually having a program that is multifaceted like that. So let's cover a little bit about what we're going to talk about here. Let's see, how is it going to let me down? Okay, back up. Okay, here's the topic. We're going to be talking about the natural world in urban areas and the ecosystem services they provide. This has become such a hot topic all over the world. People are trying to calculate, quantify, measure ecosystem services. And of course, the major green space components that can be used as a mitigation will be covered, but it's so much more than just you know, the major ecosystem services. There's just a slew of co-benefits that we'll touch base on. And the use of using soils to mitigate and provide ecosystem services is really a new source of research. Excuse me. When we first started looking at this 2 years ago, sorry. There wasn't a whole lot out there, and now every time I go out, there's more and more. And so from that, we've kind of have a new program going called the San Antonio Soil Carbon Project that you'll learn about, and then the potential value of using green spaces and how we can support that effort. So the natural world can be valued in many ways, and I'm learning all these economic tools that I totally did not train for back in A&M. I wish I had, but it pretty much comes down to what's looked at are the ecosystem services provided, and there's a lot of new papers talking about this is intrinsic. You can't put a monetary value on it. It's a public asset, and looking at how we manage those and impact them, whether from land use or from just managing the properties. So these assets or benefits can be measured, quantified, and you can try to do calculations that beef up the reasons why we should preserve these areas. But when it comes down, it's really tough to have a tree have any kind of economic benefit compared to a new shopping center. So those are kind of some of the issues that we seem to have in monetizing the services individually. But their combined value, that's invaluable. And they really haven't come up with a good model or a way to put a value on it. And that's one of the great things about talking to this group. You know that. You've already sensed, and your mind is probably go, yeah, it's because of this and this and this and this, and it's all interrelated. It's like ecology. So the natural world in an urban area is most often referred to green space. And there's if you will go searching for keywords or whatever, green space is one of the big things that pops up. And the research, sometimes it's pretty detailed and maybe not as significant, but there's a lot of good information out there about how we can use these systems, these natural systems, to assist in solving many urban challenges. And maybe I should do my disclaimer here, is that I don't think it's going to be any magic bullet to solve all the problems, that it's going to take a concerted effort. And it's really going to be a major educational to kind of be more aware of what we do on so many different levels. And for us, looking at soils, just the way they're managed, the way the vegetation managed, you can either decrease or increase the potential. The green spaces we're familiar with, our green spaces contain the trees, other vegetation, and soil. And it's been really, really well documented about trees and vegetation and how they can mitigate urban challenges, right? You've got the air and water quality and flooding. And in fact, San Antonio has been a leader in doing analysis on that. We did our first one, I think it was 2001, another one in 2009. And now we have the recent release, dun, 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 April of 21, the San Antonio Urban Forest Inventory and Analysis. And from this analysis, we know, and this just to make sure that it's understood, that they did the analysis outside the city limits into the ETJ, and that's 5 miles outside the city limits, that we have about 138 million trees, and that they calculated that these trees, just the trees, the canopies, just the tree canopies, not even the rest of the tree, it removes about 6,500 tons of pollution. They've been able to calculate that it's saving health costs of $63 million for San Antonians. It reduces stormwater runoff by over 380 million cubic feet. And of course, we have the energy savings. Overall, 22 million for the entire public. And then that calculates down to about $14 for every man, woman, and child. And so that's one of the reasons why people are looking at, these are public assets. So how do we manage those? How do we manage them in an equitable way? And this is, I knew a little bit about soils because I do have a degree with soils in there, but I didn't understand the significance of how soils can be used. And when we look at soils, and you, of course, know very well that looking around town, you'll go, whoa, that soil's not in very good shape. And another soil is like, oh, look how beautiful that soil is. I don't know, you may not appreciate the qualities of soils like I do, but I think that's going to be one of the main key components of this talk. It's a healthy soils supports ecosystem functions so that we can get all these different benefits and functions out of soils, but they have to be managed in a way to be healthy. And so what does that mean? Let's take a look a little bit at soils and using them as a mitigation strategy. So I'm sure that you had in your training that soils are made up of these different components. You got your mineral particles. And I don't know how detailed your training is, but when we talk about clay, silt, sand, and gravel, basically that's talking about the size of the particulate matter. And yes, they do have some different physical and chemical characteristics too that we won't go into. But in between the mineral particles, there's supposed to be space. And in that space, that's where you get your theoretical, that's so theoretical, 25% air and 25% water. But it's going to be, yep, it's the organic matter that turns out to be the source, the basis of the soil's potential of mitigating for urban climate change. And so, typical healthy soil, 5% organic matter, right? But and I know, looking at some of our soils, especially some of those in the very well-used city parks, we'd be lucky to have 1 to 2% organic matter. Of course, soil carbon storage is the vital ecosystem service. And what does that provide for us? One of those is air quality, right? And soils naturally absorb CO2 from the atmosphere where it can be available immediately for digestion or use by microorganisms or plants or whatever, broken down, or it could be stored. And so how do we tilt the balance towards let's store it for future use or to get it out of the atmosphere? And as we talk about that CO2, we're really talking about greenhouse gases because soils can do a lot more greenhouse gases than just CO2. But basically, when you're looking at the research, everything's measured by CO2. And that's what we're going to do our measurements and speak from is CO2, or CO2 being pulled out of the atmosphere and stored as carbon, because you'll find out they're different. And so the human activities, climate, all of this affects these processes. And re-releasing the CO2 back to the atmosphere, especially through soil degradation or an increased storage, which leads to greater mitigation potential. But this one is what blew my socks off, okay? A healthy soil typically can sequester around 3 times more carbon than above ground vegetation. And I'm a tree person, right? I have been a tree person for a long time and I love my trees, and they play a crucial role in this whole mitigation strategy for using green spaces. But I didn't realize the capacities of soils. And it's all built on how healthy can you get the soils, can you make the soils and get them to function. And that there's a hypothesis out there. One of the books that I'm going to show you at the end, a reference that just lit up my soul, I think, in reading it. So the hypothesis is that if we increase the world soils by 2%, we could reduce the CO2 to pre-industrial levels in about 10 years. And to me, that is so hopeful. It kind of gives me chills, and it makes me want to get up in the morning and do this again, And just so that we don't confuse terms, just want to say that 1 ton of stored carbon is equal to 3.67 tons of carbon dioxide removed. So keep that in your mind as we go through some of this information. And of course, not all carbon is created equal. And when you're looking at the soil profile, and you're all familiar with the organic layer, and many of us have these wonderful xeriscape or wallscape beds where we put the leaves in, and then we cover those leaves up with mulch, and we come back in a year and we go, oh my God, where'd it go? I can see soil back through the cover. But so this is really the reactive soil organic matter. So it's pulling CO2 out of the air, and then it's re-releasing it. It's going back and forth. It's very, very dynamic in the minutes, days, or whatever. But eventually, you're going to see that there's an improvement in the structure of the topsoil, and that you're going to see it's darker. There's more porosity, and things are happening, and you may see more macroorganisms since you can't see the micro, but you could see the fungi, mycelium. So you could be seeing some of that. But as you get to these lower levels in the topsoil, you're not able to actually distinguish the plant and animal material anymore. And this is where you start getting it a little bit more stable, and it can hang out in these areas, especially in undisturbed forest areas, for up to 50 years. But what we really want to do is keep moving it through the soil profile, right? And this is hard. I'm glad, I don't think you can see my hands, but I really like to talk with my hands. So you'll just have to visualize me pulling that carbon down into the soil. And the research tells us, yeah, rain helps or moisture helps to make that happen. And so it kind of brings us to, we may need to add a little bit more water to some of our soils to keep up the microbial activity and to move that soil carbon further down in the profile. And one of my colleagues at NRCS, who's going to be helping us with the soil carbon project, he says, Debbie, don't forget, you got these clay soils in San Antonio, they shrink and they swell, they shrink and they swell. And when they shrink, what do you get? You get a bunch of cracks in your soil, right? And he goes, and that organic matter can just fall right down in those cracks. So it can get down there to lower depths than what water could ever move it in the, much more rapidly. So I want you to go out to your yard the next time there's a drought and really reappreciate those cracks in your soil, like me, okay? So looking at as you're moving that material down, that organic matter becomes more resistant to decomposition, and it's way past, you can't recognize it anymore. And I kind of laugh. And so when you start going to centuries and thousands of years, eventually we'll be able to call it fossil fuels, right? So we've talked a little bit about the carbon sequestration and its improvement for air quality and that sort of thing. But it turns out the same healthy soils, the same practices that we're going to talk about for getting those healthy soils are the same practices that are needed to increase stormwater storage and filtration. So soil organic matter, again, plays fueling the life of the soil. We eat carbs and the soil eats soil organic matter for its carbs. Very similar process going on, like the microflora in our gut is doing all this action for us. We have all these different microbes and macrobes that are active in the soil. And the amount of activity and organisms that are actually in our soils, it's amazing, even in highly degraded soils, there's still a bunch of different organisms. So the next time you walk across your grass, or you're walking through your xeriscape, wildscape bed, or the prairie that you helped install, think about all the life. I want you to be able to start visualizing this other world that we really don't know that much about, and to start looking at, as you start improving your diet, how do you improve the diet, the biodiversity of the organic matter that you're feeding your soil? And what happens when you start getting a healthy soil? It starts creating plenty of air pockets. Those air pockets turned out to be crucial, not only for plant health, but also for maintaining that right balance of air and water, so that the microorganisms and that whole microflora can thrive beneath the soil surface. And the amazing thing is the sponge-like quality. And, and I'm an older person, right? And I remember those Rolay commercials that used to say that it could absorb 300 times its weight in excess stomach acid, right? Well, that's what you think about when you're looking at organic matter. it can just swell up like a sponge. And so that's where we get the water sponge concept. And this next fact, I want you hopefully to be able to memorize this and share it with the next guest that you have at your house for a dinner party. And you're just going to blow them away. You're going to tell them, did you know that just a 1% increase in your soil organic matter can absorb an additional 20,000 gallons of stormwater per acre? And you're like, okay, Deb, thanks for the per acre thing, but what does that mean for like a residential lot or a small pocket prairie or something? So this is it. I did the calculations for you. So a typical residential lot, an R6, a 6,000 square foot lot, not, not one with a bunch of patios and swimming pools, but just a straight driveway and footprint of the building. You got about 3,000 cubic or 3,000 gallons of additional storage capacity in that soil. So unlike the next person, I love my rain barrels. I use them, and of course, there are much more options in how you use them. But I want you to start thinking of the soil. It is your other rain harvest cistern. Just think, the common normal lot is 3,000 additional gallons of stormwater in every event. Of course, when it gets saturated, that reduces, but it's allowing filtration faster than you can believe. Typically, my rain garden in the Blackland prairies, which are not supposed to percolate, when was that? 2018, I think, when we just had that constant rain. My rain garden was drained out within 24 hours almost every time. So it's a very, very effective method for not only reducing stormwater runoff, filtering out pollutants, but just think of all the water that you're storing in your soil for your plants to make them happier and healthier without using salts water, especially chlorinated water. And then as that water's moving down in the soil profile, recharging the aquifer, recharging groundwater, it's slowly also recharging and maintaining flows within our rivers and creeks with much, much cleaner water than that surface runoff stuff. All right. So this is actually, I created this for the engineers that I work with, because they're like, a clay soil is a clay soil is a clay soil. And I go, no, really, there's differences when you start looking at the structure and the way you manage your soils. So yes, this is from my yard, right? The one on the left is from a landscape area where I add leaves and mulch just about every year. And the one on the right, okay, it may be a little exaggerated because this is soil in my front yard where the roofing supply company drove their truck through my yard to dump or to just deposit my roofing materials on my roof. And yeah, that's pretty compacted. So basically, they're the same clay soils, but which has more soil carbon and more air pockets to give us all those benefits. So obvious when you show a picture, isn't it? So just kind of, yeah, I know you're familiar with all these benefits, but I like summarizing them and pulling them back out and laying them all out, because there's so many of these that's not really very, we can't calculate them easily. In fact, like recreational opportunities, those are considered hedonic values, but we really feel that green spaces, and there's so much research out there about reducing stress, reducing crime, and therefore improving public health just for those benefits alone, besides better air quality and water quality. But I want to bring your attention to this little diagram about the sponge city. And I think that people forget, and this is such a new concept, is that when we can get the water to infiltrate into the ground instead of running off on surface water down our driveways, down the street, into that trapezoidal grass channel that leads straight into one of our creeks, then we're improving the whole hydrological cycle, which eventually will increase rain. We'll actually get a little bit more rain, more consistent rain. You're reducing the heat island effect, and it's it's just a cycle. We're seeing a lot of chain events coming from the flooding to the fires, et cetera, and they're all building on each other, right? But there's a way to start building the other way. Using the information, with this information, these capabilities, it's easy to see how green spaces with their soils and their vegetation can help us meet a lot of challenges and make really nicer urban areas to live in. And all of this kind of got started with the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan. And at the end of that plan, one of the mitigation strategies was to actually use public green spaces to sequester CO2 as a mitigation strategy. In fact, it was one of the most popular, got the most votes for, and they did a pretty good job of putting it into the plan. Probably could have wordsmithed it a little bit better, but it's in there. So from that point, we've been working, Gia and our partners, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of those partners. We've been working on, okay, how do we do this? If we want to look at using green spaces with their trees, the vegetation, and the soils, now that we have this understanding, how do we use this to quantify? So it was felt the first thing we needed to know, well, how much carbon do we have in our soils? So getting that baseline information was the first step. And then developing a menu of recommended practices that would enhance the soil health and improve ecosystem services. Apply those practices, and then again, somewhere between 2 and 5 years to evaluate their effectiveness, and then build on programs, education, incentivizations, etc., policies or whatever. And so that's kind of what we laid out. And so how do we get that baseline data? Okay, who's got the money to do that? Well, one of your wonderful master naturalist volunteers did a cold call to the NRCS's state office in Temple, Texas, and asked for assistance. And by golly, that was in October of 2018. You know how slow the wheels of agencies move. And of course, COVID's put us a whole year behind. But we have a memorandum of understanding, a joint agreement between the city of San Antonio and the NRCS to come to San Antonio and actually take soil samples. They want access to city properties so that they can update their soil survey for Bexar County. It's out of date. It needs to be updated. So that's their main goal, and they're getting funded for that. And while they do that, they're going to give us baseline soil carbon data, which is so wonderful. And as we go along, we have a wonderful funding opportunity that's come our way so that we can actually look at some additional percolation information and biological activity, because I know that there's not going to probably be too many folks in the city that are interested in that. But I think that master naturalists, native plant folks, the Office of Sustainability, and maybe researchers at UTSA and other universities may be interested in taking this further to better understand and document what's the potential here in South Central Texas. So after they do the analysis of these samples, they're actually going to make recommendations to the city and how to make healthier soils. Their soil sample size, they had to set it up so that it's just statistically defendable, looking at the soil types they needed to sample. And of course, we wanted ecoregions for our considerations because we do most of our stuff that way. And fortunately, soil types and ecoregions pretty much go together. And then we wanted to look at uses. They're so excited about looking at urban uses. They want to look at old established residential, and then they want to go, you know, Debbie, can you get us access to one of those scorched earth subdivisions? And I go, yeah, I think we can. And so they're compiling these soil samples that go into their database. They have this incredible soil sample database or bank. It's like a herbarium kind of for soils up in the Midwest. And then, of course, we also asked for them to divide the samples to make sure that every city council district has some soil sampling going on. And here's the eco regions that we were looking at. For the city of San Antonio, the first three are a priority. And in the southern part of the county, pretty much outside the city, we've got the Post Oak Savannah areas. So what does this mean? We combed and combed research projects. And again, this is an emerging topic that's not everybody, they're not standardized. The researchers, sometimes they gave gross carbon sequestration, sometimes it was net. So we tried to pull only from those research papers that gave us net. We did the conversions, and then we looked at stormwater reduction so that we could kind of look at these different uses or ecosystems within an urban area. What can we expect from it? And these numbers are pretty much from not managing or improving the management like we're hoping to do. So basically it looks like that turf grass lawns, xeriscapes, prairies, forests, all of them are right around 1 ton of carbon sequestered per year net. And of course, there is a chance that this would eventually reach saturation point. I don't think we'll see that anytime soon. I think we got at least 50 years and maybe longer, because we may not be as effective here in semi-arid San Antonio as we would be over in eastern, like in the Houston area. But I want to bring your attention. Look at the floodplain areas. This is amazing. And we abuse our floodplain so much in the urban areas. And hopefully working with parks and public works that we can kind of turn this around. But look at the typical for an undisturbed floodplain forest. And we've always promoted in San Antonio the climax hardwood forest, where eventually your understory starts dying out and you have canopy, mainly canopy, which a lot of folks like. They feel more comfortable. And of course, stormwater really likes that because the water can go through it faster. And hopefully somebody's keeping time too, because I kind of have a tendency to get carried away. But but look at that. We're looking at 3 tons versus the typical 1 ton on other systems. So wetlands, floodplains, they have a lot more potential. All right. Let's take a look at public green spaces. This is not talking about golf courses or business parks or university campuses. This is aquifer protection properties, where we have some that we've bought and some that are in conservation easements. City parks that are within the city limits. We've got this amount of acreage. I don't feel like I need to read those off for you, but is the additional gallons of stormwater stored with just a 1% increase in soil organic matter? Is that incredible or what? 31 billion gallons of water. Can you imagine recharging our aquifer with that cleaned water? So the Edwards Aquifer Authority folks are really interested, and they've set up some incredible, much more detailed research already to explore these ideas. But putting all that together, so you've got this ability to remove carbon, to store water, but let's look at when you get down to the bottom line. For the CO2 that's actually removed from the atmosphere, you've got about 600,000 tons of CO2 removed, which is equivalent to about 135,000 automobiles every year. And that's nothing to laugh at. I think this could be very instrumental in helping us reach our goals. So how do we support this effort? We know that we're going to have to convince some folks that it really has value. But right now, from what you've learned tonight, and I think you can see that our park system is really, really an important part of the city's green infrastructure. So preserving it, increasing the amount of park green spaces is crucial. And to do that, we'll probably need to modify some development standards and support some other incentive programs. We want to improve floodplain management techniques, looking at stormwater requirements so that we're not stripping out all the vegetation in our floodplains, and really focusing on maybe modifying the park dedication ordinance. And we'll talk a little bit more about that too. So, but we also want to support parks and public works. And being in these meetings with these departments, they're terrified of the citizen that calls their council person and goes, parks or public works is abusing our neighborhood. They're not maintaining these areas. We want immediate relief from this overgrown vegetation or whatever. So this really has to be stratified, and I'm so looking forward. I really want to start developing some curriculum and educational material with both Master Naturalists and the Native Plant Society folks. And we've got some other folks that have expressed an interest. But we also want to start promoting the use of green infrastructure for stormwater management. And we're hoping with this new bond that's coming forward, we'll be looking starting in October at the bonds. We would like every public project that's going for bond to have a certain percent dedicated for green infrastructure, whether that's tree planting or stormwater management or whatever. We want to lead by example. The city needs to put its money where its mouth is, and of course, I'm not just ask the development community to foot the bill, right? Okay. So I'm just going to have this one slide to talk a little bit about the way we manage stormwater, our flood control projects. We typically go right at the point where there's houses flooding, and I laugh and just go, and we dig a big hole and try to reduce the impact to the floodplain in that section. And many of you are familiar with some of those projects. There's the stormwater detention facility right by the Leon Valley municipal offices just south of the Bandera Bridge. We've got the Barber Drive project. We actually straightened and reclaimed some floodplain on Beidle Creek on the northeast side near Morgan's Wonderland. So we'd like to kind of go, hey, let's rethink this. What are we losing? And can we modify these flood control projects and disperse many systems throughout the watershed so that they're sized better for a community? They're bringing more of those green benefits from air, water quality, and just the green that promotes human health. There you go. But we also want to look at the park's dedication requirement. When I was working with the council person, working with the council person and looking at how the apartments around me, I live near just north of Fort Sam, and we've got a bunch of new apartments going in, right? So we found out that all of these apartments did not dedicate any public park space. They did not pay any fee in lieu of. They met the requirements by building their clubhouses and their swimming pools. And so we have an amendment to go forward that we really feel that there needs to be more public spaces provided. I think COVID has really shown that, since these clubhouses and swimming pools were not available during COVID, and that all of those apartment folks were out on our trails. So making sure that we have some green space that's pervious and functioning as we need it to function for ecosystem services, I think is a huge step in the right direction. And then looking at all those programs, there's things happening. SAWS is looking at revamping their Terrascape program. The River Authority has been a leader in these concepts for a long time, and they continue to do so. We've been working with the JBSA, the Joint Bases. They're actually going to be creating a Sentinel landscape program for Camp Stanley that will incorporate a lot of these concepts. And again, we've been talking with the Edwards Aquifer Authority to incorporate some of this. And all of this is working hand in hand with the Office of Sustainability so they can capture those credits for meeting our climate action goals. So residential properties have a huge role. I mean, we are mainly residential property when you look at it, and you've all been very familiar with these practices and keeping it up and looking at these practices. And another role of the first thing is to reduce or eliminate gasoline powered equipment. That's a direct reduction in emissions. There's no, you don't have to measure that. It's already measurable, and that helps us to meet these goals. And then, of course, increasing the soil organic matter and keeping it in the soil so it can mitigate to deeper depths for long-term storage, protecting that soil. And you all know that, when the soil is exposed to the climate, to the sun, oh my gosh, we took some soil temperatures at a couple of parks. The bare soil, 114 degrees, and the soil that had vegetation, 96. That's big. Because the decomposition of soil organic matter is based on temperature, because you can just see those little microbes. They're breathing as fast as they can at those higher temperatures. And the faster they're breathing, the more soil organic matter they're breaking down and returning CO2 back to the atmosphere. Using the layer method of landscaping, so you can increase your carbon sequestration in that one little area just from vegetation. Using deep-rooted, long-lived plants to increase the capability and promoting stormwater runoff. And I think this was one of the wonderful things about working with the stormwater engineer. 2 years ago, I started feeding him some of this information about not mowing as much. The roots of a plant reflect how much you take off the top. And if we can get these native grasses to grow at larger plants, deeper rooting levels, then you can actually stabilize floodplain, your stream and creek banks. You can infiltrate more stormwater. It's a lot of banks. And he still asks me about that. And he goes, Debbie, we got to get that information out. So that's fun. So what can we do? What can the master naturalist do? You have all this basic information, and just repackaging it to provide educational programs, especially to youth, and assisting the public to better understand. And I'll never forget, a consultant, was working with one of those survey preference things with public stakeholder groups, right? Okay, we've got this image here of, I call it the banker's look, where the hedges or the shrubs are all in little bonbons or squared off, and you got a little turf grass that's mowed to 2 inches height and real straight edges. And then we've got this wildscape, which is, of course, what I love. And so they showed these two totally opposites of the pendulum and say, which one do you like? And everybody raises their hand for the banker's look, right? And so what they did in the next slide is that they presented a hybrid between the wildscaping, where there's not much management. And people are actually afraid of those landscapes. I've talked to so many people in different neighborhoods that are afraid of those types of landscapes. So there was a hybrid, and then they went through the benefits by managing this a little bit differently. Here's the look you can have, and here are the benefits you would receive, and for yourself and for the community. And everybody chose the hybrid. And so working with the master naturalist, I think we can do some programs like that. In fact, I get so excited. Anyway, and maybe including some of this information in your master naturalist training for new volunteers. But of course, it's a huge thing trying to change tradition, our mow and blow guys. And of course, the park contractors, they know that they can tilt that weed eater and go across the vegetation and take it down to the nubbies, and it's not going to grow as fast. They get paid whether it grows or not. So that'll be a whole nother challenge. And we've been talking with the guy who's in charge of the contracts. He gets it, but he just really needs direction. We need to help him rewrite some of those contract specs and put in some penalties. Hey, if your guys go out there with your weed eater tipped over, then there's a penalty because that causes so much erosion. We see a lot of damage, degradation due to that. And again, overcoming some of those fears of overgrown vegetation. and having clear, distinct areas that are not mowed with areas that are mowed, and lots of interpretive signage. And there's money out there for interpretive signage just from the stormwater utility fees, because this is going to benefit stormwater, reduce stormwater runoff, and clean that water before it goes into our streams and creeks. And that's what our stormwater utility fee is all about, is water quality to meet federal clean water standards. So kind of getting ahead on some possible projects, but I kind of wanted to bring your attention to that bottom photograph here. That's over in Breckenridge Park. Do you think we have some erosion on that side? Well, this is what we're up against, is a lot of contractors that have been working these type of operations, and how do we modify that and do it with a smile? So using soil's inherent capabilities to be a carbon sink and a water sponge will go a long way towards building more resilient urban areas where everyone can be more comfortable and safe outdoors. No matter what socioeconomic neighborhood you live in, we want to make sure that we're providing as many benefits as you want, that you have the baseline basic understanding of these concepts, so that you can ask for the right programs that you want, make your own informed decisions. And one of our goals, this is really a big goal for me, is for children to actually be able to play safely in our streams, that they can wade. And I don't know how many of you know that the San Pedro restoration, creek restoration in the downtown portion there, it was set up so that it could be waded through, but when they had storm events, the pollution load was so high that they had to redesign that little portion and turn it into, you can just get your feet wet, you cannot do full body contact. And that's what it's all about everywhere in the city, whether it's Woodlawn Lake Park or the community I work with, Lakeside, they all, there's no touching or anybody contact with the water. So here's some references. I hope you'll take a look, and I want you to know I enjoyed the first book. It was good, but the Grass, Soil, and Hope, oh my gosh, I couldn't put that book down. That was better than a murder mystery to me, okay? I think that everyone in this group will enjoy it. Let me know what you think. And we have tons of more information and presentations that we've given similar to this, and even the Unified Development Code recommendations that we want to put forth in this UDC revision cycle that starts this fall and will end next spring. Yes, let me know if you have any questions on that. And special thanks to one of your very, very special members who has her little seed, and her being the representative for the Master Naturalist at the Climate Action and Adaptation Table for the Technical Committee for Water and Natural Resources, where she did a lot of research and kept bringing this information to the table. And she encouraged me to read it, and I said, yeah, we got to do this. She's the one that did the cold call up to the NRCS office in Temple, Texas back in 2018. And I really want to give special thanks. Gia is so blessed to have all these university interns that are top-notch researchers and pulling together and helping with this information. And hopefully we've given them a good foundation to move on in their careers. And I can't thank Annalisa Peace and the Greater Edwards Aquifer Alliance for supporting me in these endeavors, for engaging and coordinating partners. Thank you so much for that opportunity. And I think we're ready to take questions. I have no idea where we are on time.
Debbie, we're good. It's 7:45, so we're doing all right. We do have some comments and questions, and thank you so much for that presentation. That was fascinating. I learned so much. I had no idea.
Isn't it amazing?
Yeah, that's really exciting stuff. I wanted to start by, I have my own question for you about xeriscaping, which of course a lot of people do with the idea of water conservation.
Mhm.
And a lot of people use rock gardens or rocks or pebbles or what have you, you know, in place of turf grass, which of course, as we all know, is terrible and has no business being here. But I was just wondering if those rock gardens are getting in the way of rainwater permeability into the soil, and if that's contributing to water runoff into our streets. What do you think? Is there like a happy medium?
I think there is a happy medium. I did quite a bit of rock work and use of decomposed granite in some landscapes back in 2014. And it took me a while. I kept thinking, is this the best idea? Because what we're finding, unfortunately, the landscape fabric does not promote healthy microorganism ecosystems below the soil. Can you, and I just have to give you this visual because I actually got this off of Drumgool's. He was interviewing somebody out of Austin, right? And he goes, can you see that little earthworm hitting its head on top of the landscape fabric and trying to keep from drowning because the soil's saturated? So these
Yeah.
are things that how do we teach that? But there is a happy medium. And what I really like, and I still encourage, is to have a very narrow dry creek bed where you have some landscape fabric, but it's really easy for microorganisms to migrate around that. And that when you're using that as a rain garden or a bioswale, and that you've got a big berm behind it, you're capturing all this additional stormwater besides what you're capturing with your increased soil organic matter. You're getting double bangs for your bucks. We could really solve a lot of flooding issues by just holistically adopting some of these practices. So think of your yard and how many bioswales and rain garden areas can you incorporate to slow that water down, but not flood your property. And you can do it. It's pretty easy. And when you look at the Austin's rain garden brochure and you do all this measuring, I went, "Boom, that's too hard." So you play around with it. And what I do when I do a rain garden, I always just allow for what I call the spillway area to go down the natural path of what it would have done before. So it's like stormwater management techniques for putting in detention ponds or detention facilities for holding back water.
Right. Right. Okay. All right. Well, let me start with some questions and comments from the chat.
Okay.
Let's see. The first one we have, somebody, let's see, asked, when there are large cracks in the soil, should I be mowing or mulching to force more organic material down into the soil?
Whoa, that is a person who's really has a deep thought. Oh my God, I love this. So there's when you have deep cracks, you know that you're losing moisture out of the soil. So how do you keep that moisture in? That's kind of the tricky part. I've been doing this for 2 summers now. I have a very small patch of St. Augustine. I don't have to water it or whatever in the back, but I don't mow it in the summer. And so I'm going to say, using your own best judgment, you're going to have to do some trials. You may want to take off, no more than 50%. And a lot of this, we all learned from Calvin Finch back in the 90s. And I'm sure David Rodriguez from the Extension Service are promoting, is that you don't cut more than half of the grass. You keep the grass at least 3 inches high. And now we're recommending 4 to 5 inches. Because it's okay. It's okay if some of the grass touches the top of your foot. You don't need to panic on that. But looking at, maybe when you have those cracks, this is the time that you go over and sift some compost down in there, or some mulch even. So
Right.
there's all kinds of things that you could be thinking about. And we're going to include those when you try them out. Let us know. And we need to make up a list of, okay, this worked for me, or don't do this at home.
Right. You know, another idea I like that's never quite taken off in the US is how in the UK they use what they call leaf litter, which is a type of compost. It's like a wet leaf litter. And if you had a pile of something like that composting, that would be like an easy thing to force into dried cracks or what have you, you know?
Oh, Amanda, that's a really good point. And of course, if you live over the aquifer, we've all had some internal conversations. Do we really want to be promoting using manure-based compost or biosolids? And I keep trying to set up a meeting with one of our mulch providers. And can we take just organic matter, such as leaf litter, and like what do we call it, the bitters brush side or whatever, and really decompose just that without it catching on fire?
Right.
And providing, I don't know about you, but I learned so much from my mom. She took all of the grass clippings and composted it and turned it into this beautiful thing. She never went out and bought compost or whatever, but it provided what she would dress her roses and her other special plants with. And by producing that type of a mulch, you really don't have to worry about the nitrogen load that you might get from biosolids or manures. So it's just something to keep in mind, especially putting it on a slope or whatever. Yeah, good point.
Right. Um, Someone has a comment about, let's see, code compliance. They're saying someone's being targeted, someone they know is being targeted for having a butterfly garden on her empty lot. She's being cited for large sunflower plants, grasses, etc. So I don't know who's citing her for this, if it's the city or if it's an HOA. It sounds like they're looking for help, and who could they reach out to in this
Yeah, and that would
situation?
be great to have a little core. I spent years and actually did PowerPoint presentations for our code compliance. And what we did is we used the example. Chicago was the leader in this in creating enabling ordinances, and they won a case where code was saying, hey, you can't have a weedy lot. And they said, hey, guess what? Your natural areas are weedy. So that's kind of, you can't have it both ways. But so what we did, because there are some safety issues and there is that concern, we worked with code to develop criteria. And what happened in a lot of cases is that they would call me out to look at, and you and I, especially, like native plant people, when a lot is actually being managed for wildflowers and when it's just really being neglected. If you've
Right.
got a lot of beggars lice and what's the other, the south is so bad this year. So if you're not managing a little bit for that, that's really letting loose a lot of invasive to other people's areas. But what we recommended that you wanted at least a 3-foot boundary around that property, so that a border, whether it's your residential yard, or it sounded like this is a whole lot by itself, is that wherever pedestrians had access, a minimum of 3 feet, so that they can see any snakes that might crawl out of there, so they can see anything that's coming or hiding. That's another issue that we really have to deal with. Is there are we had this issue at Milam Taylor Park, is that they went in and cleared out all the understory because somebody jumped out out of the understory onto the trail. So we worked with modifying what they were doing. So these are all things that have to be taken in consideration, and hearing what other people are saying and sitting down at the table and coming to a compromise on that. And, you know, I'm looking at one of my favorite places that has a wildflower area. They've been allowed to keep it. But like what we're trying to promote, that probably in a lot of these wildflower areas, most of your wildflowers have done their thing by July. And so, you know, maybe not all the sunflowers, but like I have sunflowers, but I start taking them out. I keep them out of the pathway. I keep them back from the sidewalk and where pedestrians are walking. So just being conscientious of what people's concerns are and making sure that you have a managed wildscape. It looks managed and it's addressing some of the safety concerns. Okay, that's enough of that. Thank you, but I can assist.
Right. Yeah, no, that's really good advice. Let me see here. Another question. Would you know how the data on carbon sequestration would be different in other parts of Texas or the country with different kinds of native soil than ours?
Oh, absolutely. Oh my gosh. I mean, it is so varied. We are so lucky. I mean, think about it. You can do this intuitive. So on the northwest side of town, we've got the Edwards Plateau shallow soils. Do those have more potential, or do the deep blackland prairies along Salado Creek have more potential?
Right.
Yeah. So that's kind of, yeah, think about what's growing, how thick it's growing. And the research is showing that in the eastern part of the country, and that would include East Texas, that they're going to have greater potential than what we have here in quote semi-arid, which is
Right.
going to be greater potential than El Paso, right?
Right. The desert. Yeah. Right. Yeah. That makes sense. Well, it's a
Yeah.
big, varied country for sure.
Yeah, and cold climates are going to be able to hold more soil organic matter because the temperatures are lower, right? So you don't have the microorganisms breathing and living like they are here year round. So it's really different.
Sure, sure. Another question, what are some of the better ways to amend soil annually? And are there some baseline examples of how to revitalize a park area within a subdivision that will look nice but serve to help maintain a healthy area? I think some of the things you were talking about earlier about having that a sort of a barrier, you know, against the trail or walking path, so people feel safe would be one
Mhm.
good way to do that. What do you think are some other good ideas?
It depends on how far you want to go with it and where you live, if it's feasible to do a light dressing of compost, because that compost is definitely, not only does it get rid of so many soil diseases and pathogens, especially for turf grass, but it just builds that soil organic matter. It's like eating a really healthy meal for the soil. And you can build that up over time by managing your vegetation. So we looked at some of the differences of the prairie grasses, and you can cut some of those prairie grasses a little bit lower. I'm experimenting with the HabiTurf in my front yard. I'm getting ready to actually, I've had 3 years of the barley, Texas little barley, as my green vegetative cover to try to reduce the rescue grass and some of those nasty cool season annual weeds that come in. Oh my gosh.
Mhm.
So I want to kind of plug Douglas King. They have been promoting that. They've given us free plugs to try, and I love it. I love it for a cool season. And that seems to be the trick for me. I have to keep my soil covered because I have so many neighbors that don't manage their weeds, and I will have sow thistle and beggar's lice, what's some of the other pigweed, just nasty weeds that will come in and just take off. Oh yes, the Mediterranean clover. I mean, it is a clover, it is a legume, but we have our own native legumes. We don't need that one, the bird clover. So yeah, you find what works for you and how to maintain it. And again, I knock it down with a weed eater periodically. to give it that more uniform look that people like. And but making sure that I leave enough on there and that I don't cut it the flower tops off. I let it go ahead and go a seed, and then getting that back into the system. So managing it like you were a grazer. There you go. Managing it like you're the grazer. Yeah.
Right. Naturally would be. Do you have any recommendations for a specific compost? I know at Rainbow Gardens we sell a lot of compost peat and it works really well, but I know there's a big problem with compost peat and the availability of it. So I was wondering if you had any other recommendations, like how do you feel about cotton burr as a compost? And
Oh, wow, you guys are asking some great questions. I did not know how easy it would be to burn your plants with cottonseed meal. I'm not
yeah,
quite sure about cotton burr. So
okay,
whenever you're doing a new material, do just like you were putting out something on your skin, do a test site
okay.
so that you can see. I've seen people put fresh chicken manure on their peach trees and just burned them to death.
Ooh, yeah,
Oh, yeah. So these are the things I always recommend doing composting first, because you get it to mellow out, you build up the microorganism, and it's a much more soft mitigation. But play around. But I buy my compost, typically I buy it in bulk.
right.
And I've used a lot of different materials. I like mine to be have a lot more organic matter in it, such as the leaf mold or broken down bark chip or whatever.
Right.
But they also, whoever has the contract, I know that New Earth had the contract. I'm not sure who has it this year for the green bins. And by using the green bin material, if you can figure out places that you could actually use that and maybe even put bark mulch on top of it,
Yeah.
that's a huge benefit, because we need to make that economically viable.
Yeah, I agree.
So this is it's all a part of the chain. How do we make the whole system work?
Do you know what the city does with our composted waste?
They contract the green bin material out. New Earth had the contract, so they took
Okay.
all of our green bin material, they shredded it up. When it's moist, it's a very decent material. When it's dry, it's like, oh, okay. And
Right.
it's okay. As
Yeah.
you know, you'll find little tiny pieces of plastic every once in a while, but it's not
Yeah.
bad. And I mean, we are a plastic world. What can we go ahead and use and cover with a better looking bark mulch, whether that's cedar or native or even the nuggets, whatever you're going to use, put your decorative stuff on top.
Right. We have a question. Sorry, 1 second. Okay, this question says, a little off topic. Do you have any insight about why why
Okay,
there's
let's meet for coffee.
yeah, right. Yeah, it's a big question about trash in and around our riparian areas, and I would suspect that has something to do with flooding and rain events. Is there anything to be done to prevent the trash from getting there? I mean, yeah, that's a pretty big question right there.
It's a whole nother topic, isn't it?
Yeah.
The state telling cities that they can't ban plastic bags. I'll never forget when I found a bobcat in Salado Creek dead because of a plastic bag around its neck. Yeah, so besides the sanitary, the wildlife impact is huge, the aquatic ecology impact. But yeah, making commercial properties responsible for the trash on their property would be a huge step. Right now, they're maintenance contractors. I'm dealing with commercial on Austin Highway. Their maintenance folks are blowing a lot of the parking lot trash into the alley.
Yeah.
So we also have folks blowing debris out into the street, and there's no money to enforce whether it's grass clippings or trash. There's nobody to, you can
Right.
leave a message on the SAWS recorder, but and they'll send a violation letter out. But it's tough. So it's going to take us talking with our council folks and going, here's my priority. Here's our neighborhood's priority. How are we going to address this? And
Yeah.
that's why I've become so involved in city politics.
Yeah. All right, I'm gonna have to move through these next ones because we've just got a few minutes left, which is good. People really want to talk about this. Our next one says, I wonder if there could be incentive by the city to remove permeable surf ACEs to establish native plants and build soils. Life the patio savers offered by, I think they mean like the patio savers offered by SAWS. In Silver Spring, Maryland, there were significant funds to help do that and plant native plants. They also had bioswales as part of stormwater catch. I've always wondered why San Antonio hasn't done more, but I think SAWS has several programs, like the Patio Savers one, and then they also have the program where you buy the 15 plants. Now, the one problem I have with that program is that they're not all native plants. Some of them are actually invasive plants, the ones that you can choose from, but I do think that they're trying.
Yes, yeah, we've been talking to them about offering additional credits for rain gardens and other techniques like that, and even adding organic matter to the soil to boost up your soil harvesting, your rain absorption that way. So hopefully they'll bring those forward. We started meeting before COVID, and then everything just kind of shut down. But really, we need to look at stormwater utility fees that everybody pays on their SAWS bill. And stormwater, Public Works does a great job of managing that. They do the street sweeping, they clean out our channels with the sediment, but there's so much more that we can do. So I'd love to talk more about that. And I think that actually working with commercial folks that have impermeable surfaces like parking lots or those, those landscape areas that are like little pillars within the curbs. Bless those trees and vegetation's hearts. They just don't get any rain. If they could retrofit, that they be incentivized and get credit on their stormwater utility fees, which can be thousands of dollars per month.
Right.
Yeah, so yeah, let's talk about it. Let's talk to another. That's another program and policy for incentivizing. Yes.
Absolutely. Somebody did mention you can report grass clippings, leaves, trash blown into the streets at stormwatercomplaints@saws.org. So that's good to know. Somebody has asked that, well, they believe that our soil is nitrogen limited, and they want to do legume plantings, and if you had any advice on that.
Okay, dune plantings. I'm trying to find that one. Rain gardens.
Legume.
Oh, legume plantings. Yeah. Yeah, there's legumes like one of our favorites, right? That stays short and cute is the sensitive plant. Can you buy that plant? No.
Right.
You might be able to get the seeds from Native American. I'm not sure, but these are the things that we need to keep asking our vendors for and including those. So that would definitely be a much safer way of getting nitrogen into the soil versus doing manure composting over the recharge zone for sure.
I agree. And I work at a nursery, and I can tell you that managers are paying attention. And when people ask for something and they keep hearing that request, they will find it and make it available.
Or they'll make fun of you. I have had them make fun of me.
If people want to buy it, they want to sell it,
Yeah, right?
how crazy it is. We still carry hydrangeas, and I'm like, this is a crazy thing to carry, but people want to buy them. And so I think continually requesting from wherever nursery you shop, requesting things,
Yes.
getting your friends to request. I've even gotten strangers to request, to just build up that momentum, because that really will make a difference.
It does make a difference. It's a very good comment.
I think that we are going to have to close for now. Otherwise, we're all going to be kicked off. I do want to remind everyone that tonight's presentation has been recorded. It will be on our YouTube channel, Alamo Area Master Naturalists. Anybody can view that, and please encourage your friends and family to view this as well, so we can all get the word out. Debbie, thank you so much. This was an absolutely fascinating talk tonight, and I know I learned so much, so we really appreciate it.
You are so welcome. My honor and pleasure. And if you have any further questions or want to talk about stuff, let's brainstorm on how we can move some of these ideas forward.